In a world where darkness holds its own secrets, where every shadow hides a predator, and every sound could be your last, one man will rise against impossible odds. From the depths of an ancient forest that devours the unwary, to the desperate fight for survival against creatures older than time itself. This is a story of courage, sacrifice, and the primal will to survive. The forest has awakened, and it hungers. Are you ready to face what lurks in the shadows? Subscribe now to witness the epic battle for survival against nature's deadliest predators. The first warning came on a night when the moon hid behind thick clouds, leaving the forest shrouded in impenetrable darkness. Kale moved through the underbrush with practiced silence, his bare feet finding purchase on the damp earth. He had lived in these woods all his life, knew every tree and rock formation as intimately as he knew his own reflection in the river's surface. Yet tonight, something felt different. The usual symphony of nocturnal creatures had fallen silent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed against his ears like cotton wool. His hand instinctively went to the bone knife strapped to his thigh, fingers tracing the familiar grooves carved into its surface. The weapon had been passed down through generations, each mark representing a successful hunt or a narrow escape. Tonight, he wondered if another would be added to its tally. The air carried an unfamiliar scent, musky and metallic, like blood left to dry in the sun. It made his stomach churn with unease. Kale paused beside an ancient oak whose roots twisted above ground like frozen lightning. Through the darkness, he thought he saw movement, just a flicker at the edge of his vision, gone before he could focus on it. His heart began to pound in his chest, but years of training kept his breathing steady. The elders spoke of times long past when the forest would test those who dwelled within it, sending its guardians to hunt the unworthy. He had always dismissed these tales as mere stories meant to frighten children, but now doubt crept into his mind like ivy climbing a tree trunk. He crouched lower, pressing himself against the cool bark. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped with unnatural force. The sound echoed through the trees, too loud to be any animal he recognized. His people had lived in harmony with this land for centuries, learning its patterns and respecting its boundaries. But tonight, the forest felt alien, as if some fundamental law of nature had shifted while no one was looking. Kale gripped his knife tighter, knowing that whatever prowled out there might not recognize the difference between hunter and prey. As dawn approached, Kale returned to the village, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. The circular clearing where their homes stood appeared peaceful in the early morning light, smoke curling lazily from cooking fires. Children played among the huts constructed from woven branches and mud, their laughter carrying on the breeze. To anyone else, it would seem like any other day, but Kale couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in borrowed time. Inside the council hut, the elders sat cross-legged on woven mats, their weathered faces turned toward him expectantly. Elder Mara, her silver hair braided down her back, gestured for him to speak. "Tell us what you saw," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of countless winters. Kale recounted his experience, describing the unnatural silence, the strange scent, and the presence that had watched him from the shadows. As he spoke, he noticed how the elders exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions growing graver with each word. When he finished, Elder Joran leaned forward, his knuckles white where they gripped his staff. "We feared this day might come," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Long ago, before our people settled here, there were others who called this forest home. They spoke of great beasts that roamed during times of imbalance, creatures born from the darkness itself." The other elders nodded solemnly, confirming the truth of his words. Mara took up the tale, her eyes distant as if seeing memories beyond the present moment. "They called them shadow stalkers, hunters that existed between worlds. When the balance of life and death became disrupted, they would emerge to restore equilibrium through destruction." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "For generations, we've maintained the sacred rituals, kept the old ways alive to prevent such an awakening. Something must have changed." Kale felt a chill run down his spine despite the warmth of the fire crackling in the center of the hut. "What do these creatures look like?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The elders described beasts larger than wolves, with fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and eyes that burned with an inner fire. Their claws could tear through wood as easily as flesh, and their speed defied natural laws. Worst of all, they hunted not just for food, but for sport, playing with their prey until the final moment. "We need to prepare," Kale stated, standing abruptly. "If these creatures are real, and they're awake, we don't have much time." The elders agreed, their usual calm demeanor replaced by urgent determination. They began issuing orders, strengthening the perimeter defenses, gathering weapons, and organizing hunting parties. As Kale stepped outside, he realized that the life they had known was about to change forever. The forest, once a nurturing mother, had become a deadly adversary, and they would need every ounce of skill and courage to survive what was coming. The village transformed rapidly as preparations intensified. Men and women worked side by side, reinforcing the wooden palisade that surrounded their homes with additional layers of thorny vines and sharpened stakes. Children, normally free to play, were set to tasks appropriate for their age, weaving nets, sorting arrowheads, and helping mix batches of poison derived from local plants. The air grew heavy with tension as everyone understood that their survival depended on these preparations. Kale found himself coordinating much of the defensive efforts, his reputation as the best tracker and hunter giving his words extra weight. He divided the able-bodied adults into teams, assigning specific roles based on their skills. Archers took positions in elevated platforms built into the surrounding trees, their bows strung with sinew taken from previous hunts. Spear-wielders formed mobile units that could respond quickly to breaches in the perimeter. A small group of scouts, including Kale himself, would maintain constant patrols beyond the village boundaries, watching for signs of the approaching threat. Weapon stockpiles grew throughout the compound. Bone knives, stone-tipped spears, and wooden clubs lined the walls of the central gathering area. Each weapon bore marks of careful craftsmanship, honed over years of use against more conventional forest predators. Yet Kale knew that these would be severely tested against creatures described by the elders. In response, they began experimenting with new designs, longer spears with multiple barb tips, throwing weapons designed to ricochet off trees, and specialized traps that could be triggered remotely. Food stores became another critical concern. Hunting parties ventured deeper into the forest than usual, bringing back as much game as possible while they still could. Gatherers worked tirelessly to collect edible plants, nuts, and roots, drying and storing them in secure underground caches. Water skins were filled and distributed among the shelters, ensuring that everyone had access to drinking water even if the springs became contaminated or inaccessible. As night fell, torches were lit around the perimeter, creating a ring of firelight that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. Elders performed protective rituals, chanting ancient prayers and scattering blessed herbs along the boundary. Despite the organized chaos of preparation, fear lingered in every shadow, and sleep came fitfully to those who tried. Kale walked the perimeter well into the night, checking defenses and speaking words of encouragement to those on watch. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl sent hearts racing, though nothing materialized from the darkness yet. The waiting game had begun, and with each passing hour, the anticipation of attack grew heavier in the air. 3 nights after the initial warning, the first attack came without fanfare. One moment, the forest remained still and quiet. The next, chaos erupted at the southern edge of the perimeter. Kale had been making his rounds when he heard the first scream, high-pitched and cut short, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his system. By the time he reached the scene, pandemonium had taken hold. Shadowy forms darted between trees, their movements too fast for the eye to follow properly. Where they passed, terror spread like wildfire. 2 of the creatures had breached the outer defenses, slipping through gaps that shouldn't have existed. Their bodies seemed to flow like liquid darkness, absorbing and re-emitting the firelight in disturbing patterns. Eyes that burned like embers locked onto targets with predatory precision. The first victim lay crumpled near the base of the palisade, his body contorted in ways that suggested forces beyond natural comprehension. Blood pooled around him, unnaturally dark and viscous. "Archers!" Cale shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "Focus fire on the closest target." The command spurred the defenders into action. Arrows flew from the elevated platforms, most missing their marks entirely as the creatures danced between attacks with supernatural agility. Those few that found their targets merely glanced off the beast's hides, which appeared to ripple and harden at points of impact. The creatures responded with chilling efficiency, leaping impossibly high to reach the archers' perches, their claws tearing through wood and flesh with equal ease. On the ground, spear-wielders formed a defensive line, their weapons held at the ready. When one of the beasts lunged toward them, they responded with practiced coordination, driving their spears forward in unison. The creature twisted midair, avoiding most of the strikes, but one spear found purchase in its flank. Instead of slowing, the beast seemed to feed on the injury, its movements becoming even more erratic and aggressive. It tore the spear from its body with a sickening crunch and hurled it back at the defenders, impaling one through the chest. Cale joined the fray, his bone knife flashing in the firelight. He targeted the second creature, attempting to draw its attention away from the main group of villagers. The strategy worked too well. The beast turned its burning gaze upon him, and for a moment, Cale felt as if his very soul was being weighed and found wanting. Time seemed to slow as it launched itself at him, claws extended. He rolled aside at the last moment, feeling the rush of displaced air as it passed. The ground where he had stood moments before now bore deep gouges. More villagers joined the fight, their weapons striking true against the beast's flanks. Slowly, methodically, they began to drive the creatures back toward the perimeter. But victory came at a terrible cost. 3 more villagers lay dead or dying, their bodies bearing testament to the creature's ferocity. When the remaining beast finally retreated into the forest, dissolving into shadow like smoke on the wind, an eerie silence descended over the battlefield. The survivors gathered around their fallen comrades, their faces pale with shock and grief. They had survived the first encounter, but Cale knew this was only the beginning. In the aftermath of the attack, the village council convened in urgent session. The morning light revealed the full extent of the carnage, broken bodies, shattered defenses, and psychological scars that would take far longer to heal than any physical wound. Elder Mara presided over the meeting, her usually composed features etched with lines of worry. "We cannot withstand many more attacks like that," she stated bluntly. "Our traditional methods are insufficient against these creatures." Cale stood near the center of the council circle, his thoughts racing. He had spent hours examining the battleground, searching for any weakness in their enemy's tactics. Now he shared his observations. "Their speed makes direct confrontation nearly impossible. We need to adapt our strategies to account for their mobility." He described how the creatures seemed to anticipate their movements, almost as if they could read their intentions. "We must learn to think differently, to move unpredictably." The discussion turned to new defensive measures. Elder Joran suggested expanding their network of traps, but with modifications. Instead of trying to kill them directly, we should aim to slow them down, create opportunities for counterattacks. This sparked a cascade of ideas: pits covered with woven grass, tripwires connected to falling logs, and concealed snares designed to entangle rather than ensnare. Each idea built upon the last, creating a complex web of defensive measures that would hopefully give them an edge. Weapon improvements became another priority. Cale proposed developing shorter, more maneuverable weapons that could be used effectively in tight spaces. "The long spears were too unwieldy against such fast opponents," he explained. "We need something that allows us to strike quickly and retreat." The blacksmiths immediately began experimenting with new designs, incorporating materials that might prove more effective against the creature's resilient hides. Perhaps most importantly, they implemented a rotating watch system that ensured constant vigilance. No longer would they rely solely on nighttime guards now. Every hour of every day required dedicated observers scanning the forest for signs of movement. Communication systems were established using signal fires and coded drum beats, allowing different sections of the perimeter to coordinate responses more effectively. Specialized response teams were created, each trained in specific combat scenarios based on the night's encounter. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the atmosphere in the council hut shifted from despair to determination. While the reality of their situation remained dire, the process of planning and preparing gave everyone a sense of purpose. They understood now that brute force alone wouldn't save them. Survival would require intelligence, adaptability, and unwavering resolve. The Shadow Stalkers had shown them their weaknesses, but they had also provided valuable lessons. The question was whether they could learn quickly enough to survive the next encounter. Days passed in tense anticipation, each sunrise bringing both relief and dread. The village had transformed into a fortress of paranoia, with every inhabitant constantly scanning the treeline. Kale observed how the prolonged state of alertness began affecting people's behavior. Sleep deprivation painted dark circles under eyes, while jumpiness turned minor noises into potential threats. Children, sensing the adults' anxiety, grew unusually quiet, their games taking on darker themes as they acted out scenes of attack and defense. Among the warriors, a subtle hierarchy emerged based on performance during the first encounter. Those who had faced the creatures directly gained a certain respect, their opinions carrying more weight in strategic discussions. New bonds formed between fighters who had stood shoulder to shoulder against impossible odds, while old rivalries faded in the face of common danger. Kale noticed how these relationships improved coordination during training exercises, as individuals anticipated each other's moves with increasing accuracy. The community's structure evolved as well. Traditional roles blurred as everyone contributed to the collective survival effort. Farmers helped fortify defenses, hunters taught civilians basic combat skills, and even the elderly found themselves useful in maintaining lookout posts. Meals became communal affairs, served in shifts to ensure constant vigilance. Stories told around evening fires shifted from tales of past hunts to discussions of tactical maneuvers and survival strategies. The very language they used changed, incorporating new terms for the creature's behaviors and attack patterns. Most significantly, a profound shift occurred in their relationship with the forest itself. What had once been a benevolent provider now felt like an enemy territory. Paths that had been safe for generations suddenly seemed treacherous, and familiar landmarks took on sinister aspects. The villagers developed elaborate systems for marking safe routes and identifying potential ambush points. Rituals that had previously celebrated the forest's bounty transformed into ceremonies seeking protection from its wrath. Through all these changes, Kale served as both leader and observer. He guided the transition from panic to preparedness, helping people channel their fear into productive action. Yet he couldn't ignore the toll it took on everyone's psyche. Laughter became rare, replaced by nervous glances and whispered conversations about who might be next. The village maintained its outward appearance of order and purpose, but beneath this facade, cracks were beginning to show in the foundation of their society. The second attack arrived on the seventh night, following a pattern that would soon become horrifyingly familiar. It began with the systematic dismantling of their outer defenses, traps disabled, warning systems silenced, and perimeter guards eliminated with brutal efficiency. Kale had been leading a patrol about half a mile from the village when he first noticed the disturbance. The forest, usually alive with nocturnal sounds, had fallen silent except for the occasional rustle that seemed deliberately placed to draw attention. "Something's wrong," he whispered to his companions, signaling for them to form a defensive circle. The hairs on his neck stood on end as he scanned the darkness, every shadow seeming to pulse with potential threat. Then came the first scream from the village direction, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. "They're hitting the eastern sector," Kale barked, already moving at a sprint. "Signal the western team to circle around. We'll try to flank them." As they approached the village, the scale of the assault became clear. At least 4 creatures had breached the perimeter simultaneously, each targeting different sections of the defense. Unlike the previous attack, these beasts displayed uncanny coordination, working in pairs to isolate and overwhelm groups of defenders. Where one creature drew attention with a frontal assault, another would slip through the resulting chaos to attack from behind. Kale arrived just in time to witness one such maneuver. A young warrior named Tavi had cornered a beast against a section of reinforced palisade, her spear poised for a killing blow. Before she could strike, a second creature dropped from above, its claws sinking into her shoulders. The pair disappeared into the darkness before anyone could intervene, leaving behind only Tavi's discarded weapon and a trail of blood that quickly evaporated into mist. "Fall back to the central square," Kale commanded, realizing that their current strategy of defending the perimeter was playing directly into the creature's hands. The order triggered a chaotic retreat as defenders abandoned their posts to regroup. This, too, proved to be exactly what the Shadow Stalkers wanted. Freed from having to breach fixed defenses, they began picking off isolated individuals with surgical precision. The battle reached its climax in the village center, where the remaining defenders had formed a tight circle around the elders and children. For creatures emerged from different directions, their movements synchronized like dancers in some macabre performance. They feinted and attacked in perfect harmony, forcing the defenders to split their attention dangerously thin. Just when it seemed they would break through, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the entire clearing, not from the sky, but from Elder Mara's staff as she chanted an ancient incantation. The sudden burst of light temporarily disoriented the creatures, giving the defenders precious seconds to reorganize. Seizing the opportunity, Kale led a desperate counterattack that drove two of the beasts back into the forest. The remaining pair vanished into shadow, leaving behind 12 more bodies and a village on the brink of collapse. As dawn broke over the devastated settlement, Kale understood that they couldn't keep fighting defensively. They needed to take the battle to the creature's domain. The morning after the second attack brought not clarity but confusion. As survivors gathered to tend the wounded and bury their dead, conflicting theories about the creature's behavior circulated through the village. Some believed the Shadow Stalkers operated purely on instinct, their coordinated attacks a natural extension of pack hunting behavior. Others argued that the level of tactical sophistication displayed suggested something more, perhaps remnants of the ancient intelligence that had created them, or even a form of hive mind connecting the beasts. Elder Joran proposed a different theory during the emergency council meeting. "These creatures aren't just predators," he suggested, spreading out a map of recent attack patterns. "They're testing us, learning our weaknesses. Notice how each attack differs slightly from the last. They're adapting faster than we can." His finger traced connections between assault points that hadn't been apparent before. "Look at this. They're mapping our defenses, identifying key personnel, and cataloging our responses." Kale examined the map, seeing patterns that sent a chill down his spine. The creatures weren't attacking randomly. They were conducting reconnaissance. Each incursion targeted different sections of the village, different groups of defenders. Survivor accounts confirmed this. The beasts seemed particularly interested in observing how various weapons performed against them, often deliberately exposing themselves to specific attacks before retreating. Even their casualties appeared calculated, as if they were willing to sacrifice members to gather crucial information. The implications were terrifying. If the creatures were indeed learning, then every failed defense only made them stronger. Kale recalled how the second attack had exploited weaknesses revealed during the first, the predictable rotation schedules, the reliance on visual tracking, the tendency to cluster defenses around perceived weak points. "They're not just animals," he concluded. "They're evolving their tactics based on our responses. Every mistake we make becomes part of their strategy." This realization forced a complete reevaluation of their defensive approach. Static fortifications became liabilities rather than assets, as each structure provided data points for their enemy's learning process. Traditional hierarchical command structures proved equally problematic, as the creatures seemed capable of identifying and targeting leaders. Even individual fighting styles became dangerous patterns that could be anticipated and countered. Kale understood now why the elders had spoken of these creatures as manifestations of imbalance. They represented nature's perfect adaptability, responding to human attempts at control with increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. The council debated long into the night about how to fight an enemy that grew stronger with every engagement. Some suggested abandoning the village entirely, hoping that dispersal might confuse their pursuers. Others advocated for aggressive patrols to disrupt the creature's learning process. Kale listened to these arguments, his mind working through possibilities. They needed a new paradigm, one that embraced unpredictability and constant change. The question was whether their people could adapt quickly enough to match their evolving enemy. The decision to abandon traditional defenses came with heavy hearts but clear minds. Over 3 days, the village transformed from a fortified settlement into a network of hidden sanctuaries scattered throughout the surrounding forest. Kale supervised the construction of these new safe havens, each designed to house no more than 10 people and camouflaged with such care that even he sometimes struggled to locate them during practice drills. The central gathering area became a ghost town, its buildings rigged with traps and false trails leading away from actual refuges. Training sessions evolved to emphasize fluidity and improvisation over rigid techniques. Warriors practiced fighting blindfolded, learning to rely on sound and intuition rather than sight. Movement patterns became randomized, with individuals and small groups shifting between hiding spots according to complex schedules known only to their immediate companions. Communication systems adapted as well. Instead of centralized signal fires, they developed a network of subtle markers using disturbed leaves, bent branches, and carefully arranged stones that could convey messages to those who knew how to read them. Weapon development accelerated under this new philosophy of warfare. Blacksmiths experimented with modular designs that allowed weapons to be quickly modified in the field. Spear shafts could be shortened or lengthened, blades interchangeable between stabbing and slashing configurations. Poison coatings varied from batch to batch, preventing the creatures from building resistance to any single formula. Even armor underwent radical redesign, favoring lightweight, flexible materials that sacrificed some protection for enhanced mobility and stealth. The most significant change came in leadership structure. Rather than maintaining a clear chain of command, authority became decentralized and situational. Any villager could initiate an evacuation or call for reinforcements based on their assessment of immediate threats. Regular meetings between small groups ensured that overall strategy remained coherent while allowing maximum flexibility in execution. This approach proved challenging at first, as lifelong habits of deference to elders and designated leaders clashed with the new paradigm. However, necessity proved the ultimate teacher. When the third attack came, the creatures found no centralized target to strike, no predictable patterns to exploit. During that encounter, Kale witnessed firsthand how their adaptations paid off. A single creature probed one of the hidden sanctuaries, triggering multiple false alarms that sent response teams converging on empty locations. Meanwhile, a small group of hunters tracked the beast using its own disruption patterns against it, eventually cornering and killing it with a combination of poison darts and entangling nets. Though the victory cost them 2 lives, it marked the first time they had successfully turned the creature's tactics back upon themselves. As they examined the slain beast, Kale noted subtle differences from those encountered before: longer claws, thicker hide in areas previously vulnerable, and evidence of healed injuries that suggested rapid regeneration. The creatures were evolving physically as well as tactically. This observation reinforced their commitment to constant adaptation, understanding that survival depended on staying perpetually one step ahead of an enemy that never stopped learning. Weeks passed in a blur of constant motion and adaptation, each day bringing new challenges that demanded innovative solutions. The village's transformation from static settlement to dynamic network of hidden sanctuaries proved both blessing and curse. While the shadow stalkers struggled to find concentrated targets, the humans faced their own set of difficulties. Resources dwindled as traditional gathering patterns became impossible, forcing them to develop new methods of sustenance collection. Medicinal herbs, once readily available, now required dangerous expeditions into contested territory. Social structures underwent perhaps the most profound evolution. Without the comfort of permanent homes or established routines, relationships shifted dramatically. Bonds formed and dissolved based on shared sanctuary assignments rather than family ties or long-standing friendships. Children learned survival skills alongside adults, their education compressed into intense, practical lessons delivered during brief moments of safety. Traditions that had defined their culture for generations, seasonal festivals, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriage rituals, became impossible to maintain, replaced by more immediate concerns of staying alive. Yet amidst this turmoil, unexpected strengths emerged. The necessity of constant relocation fostered a deeper understanding of the forest's microenvironments. People discovered hidden springs, forgotten berry patches, and natural shelters that had escaped notice during centuries of settled life. Communication evolved beyond spoken language, as individuals developed an intricate system of gestures, whistles, and environmental manipulations to convey complex messages without drawing attention. Trust became the most valuable currency, as survival often depended on accepting strangers into temporary sanctuaries based solely on subtle recognition signals. Kale found himself serving as both guide and historian, documenting these changes while helping others navigate them. He established a rotating schedule of storytelling sessions, where elders preserved cultural knowledge through oral tradition, adapting ancient tales to incorporate current experiences. These gatherings, held in different locations each time, became vital touchstones of continuity amid chaos. Through them, they maintained their identity as a people while embracing necessary transformations. The psychological toll remained significant. Dreams became troubled landscapes of hunting and being hunted, blurring the line between waking reality and nightmare. Relationships suffered from constant uncertainty, as partners might be separated for days or weeks without knowing if they would meet again. Yet paradoxically, this very impermanence fostered deeper connections during brief reunions, as every interaction carried the weight of potential finality. The community developed a resilience born of necessity, transforming fear into focused determination and loss into motivation for continued adaptation. As autumn approached, painting the forest in hues of gold and crimson, Kale recognized that their struggle had become something greater than mere survival. They were engaged in a dance of evolution, matching their enemies' adaptations with their own. Each challenge overcome wasn't just a victory against the Shadowstalkers, but a step toward becoming something new, a people shaped by adversity yet retaining the essence of who they were. The forest, once home and now battleground, had become their crucible, forging them into survivors capable of facing whatever darkness waited beyond the next tree line. The turning point came on a moonless night when the air carried the crisp bite of approaching winter. Kale had been monitoring a particular stretch of forest where recent sightings suggested increased creature activity. What he discovered changed everything. A network of tunnels beneath the forest floor, their walls lined with a substance that pulsed faintly with the same light-absorbing quality as the creature's hides. These weren't natural formations but deliberate constructions, suggesting an intelligence far beyond simple animal behavior. Further exploration revealed chambers filled with what could only be described as organic technology, pulsating nodes that seemed to process information, conduits transmitting unknown energies, and crystalline structures that resonated with harmonic frequencies. Most disturbing were the remains of previous victims, not consumed but carefully arranged around these structures, as if their life force had been somehow integrated into the system. Kale realized they had been fighting symptoms while ignoring the disease itself. These tunnels represented the creature's central nervous system, their hive mind made manifest. Returning to share his discovery, Kale found the council already in session, discussing similar findings from other parts of the forest. Patterns emerged that painted a devastating picture. The Shadowstalkers weren't just predators or even soldiers. They were extensions of a larger organism, puppets controlled by the underground network. This explained their perfect coordination, their ability to learn and adapt so rapidly. Every attack, every probe fed information back to this subterranean brain, refining their tactics with machine-like efficiency. The implications were staggering. Traditional hunting strategies became meaningless against such an opponent. Killing individual creatures achieved nothing when new ones could be grown or directed from the hive. Worse, any attack on the surface risked revealing their positions to the very intelligence they sought to destroy. Yet doing nothing meant certain extinction as the hive continued to expand and learn. During an emergency meeting in one of the deepest sanctuaries, Kale proposed a radical solution. "We need to think like them," he argued, laying out his plan. "Not just adapt our tactics, but fundamentally change how we operate. We must become a hive ourselves." The idea met with immediate resistance. Suggestions of abandoning individuality triggered instinctive revulsion. But Kale persisted, explaining how their existing adaptations had already moved them in this direction. The decentralized command structure, the fluid movement between groups, the emphasis on collective knowledge over personal achievement, these were all steps toward hive-like organization. Over several tense days, they developed a hybrid approach that maintained human individuality while adopting hive principles. Communication networks expanded to include permanent runners maintaining contact between sanctuaries, creating a crude neural network of information exchange. Decision-making became more collective, with major choices requiring consensus from representatives across the entire network. Most controversially, they began implementing a rudimentary version of the creature's energy-sharing system, using sympathetic vibrations created by synchronized drumming to enhance group awareness and coordination. The transformation proved painful but effective. Individuals initially struggled with the loss of autonomy, but survival instincts overrode personal preferences. Successes followed: coordinated attacks that caught creatures off guard, preemptive evacuations based on hive-level warnings, and increasingly accurate predictions of enemy movements. They began targeting the tunnel entrances rather than surface creatures, forcing the hive to divert resources to defense rather than offense. For the first time since the attacks began, they felt they were gaining ground in a war they had previously seemed destined to lose. Winter descended with brutal intensity, transforming the forest into a crystalline labyrinth where every breath created visible clouds that could betray position. The cold presented new challenges that affected both hunters and hunted. Frost-covered leaves muted the usual sounds of movement, while snowdrifts concealed tracks and obscured vision. Kale watched as their carefully developed strategies required yet another round of adaptation to accommodate the changing environment. The creature's behavior altered significantly with the season. Their usual lightning-fast attacks slowed, hampered by the same icy conditions that affected human movement. Yet they compensated with increased patience, often lying in wait for hours until prey inevitably slipped on treacherous ground. Their dark forms blended seamlessly with the long shadows cast by bare trees, making them even harder to detect. Most concerning was their apparent immunity to the extreme cold. While human fighters struggled with frostbite and decreased mobility, the creatures showed no signs of discomfort. Kale initiated a series of experiments to understand this advantage. Working with the village healers, they analyzed samples collected from creature lairs and compared them to local plant and animal adaptations. What they discovered offered both hope and new challenges. The creatures generated internal heat through a biological process similar to fermentation, breaking down absorbed organic matter to produce consistent warmth. More intriguingly, their cellular structure incorporated microscopic ice crystals that prevented freezing while enhancing their speed across snow-covered terrain. Armed with this knowledge, Kale oversaw the development of specialized winter tactics. Hunters began wearing clothing treated with sap from frost-resistant trees, creating a primitive form of thermal insulation. Weapons were modified with serrated edges designed to shatter the creature's ice crystal-enhanced hides. Most innovative was the creation of heat-trapping compounds using fermented plant extracts, which could be applied to traps or used to create warm zones around sanctuaries. These adaptations proved crucial during the first major snowstorm, when visibility dropped to mere feet and temperatures plummeted below anything recorded in recent memory. The storm brought the largest attack yet, with creatures emerging from multiple tunnel entrances simultaneously. Their movements, usually flowing like liquid darkness, became jerky and hesitant as the human defenses adapted to their thermal advantage. Traps baited with heat sources drew them into kill zones where ranged weapons could target their temporarily vulnerable forms. Counterintuitively, open areas became safer than forest cover, as the reflective snow surface revealed their heat signatures while concealing human positions. Despite these successes, the winter campaign exacted a heavy toll. Frostbite claimed several experienced warriors, while others succumbed to exhaustion from maintaining constant vigilance in the harsh conditions. Supplies dwindled faster than anticipated, forcing difficult decisions about ration distribution and shelter allocation. Yet through it all, the community's hive-like organization proved its worth. Information about successful adaptations spread rapidly through the network, while failures triggered immediate adjustments elsewhere. The creatures' losses mounted, forcing them to contract their operations to core territories around major tunnel complexes. By the time the first thaw arrived, both sides had learned harsh lessons about survival in the frozen landscape. The humans had developed unprecedented control over their environment, while the creatures had refined their ability to operate in extreme conditions. The battlefield had shifted from simple predator-prey dynamics to a complex contest of environmental mastery, with each side pushing the other to evolve further. Kale understood now that this conflict would not end with a decisive victory, but rather through mutual adaptation. Either they would find a way to coexist with these manifestations of nature's power, or both species would continue this deadly dance until neither remained. Spring's arrival brought not renewal but revelation. As the snow melted and rivers swelled with runoff, Kale led an expedition to map the creature's tunnel network. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemy. The tunnels didn't form a random warren, but rather precise geometric patterns aligned with ancient ley lines, natural energy conduits that crisscrossed the forest floor. At key intersection points, massive chambers housed what could only be described as organic computers, their pulsating cores processing information from countless sensory inputs. Elder Mara, accompanying the expedition despite her age, recognized the significance immediately. "These aren't just creatures," she whispered, touching the chamber wall with trembling fingers. "This is Gaia herself, responding to our presence." Her insight triggered a cascade of understanding. The shadow stalkers weren't separate entities but manifestations of the forest's immune system, grown and directed by this vast underground network. Like white blood cells attacking an infection, they sought to eliminate what they perceived as a threat to the ecosystem's balance. The implications shook Kale to his core. Every adaptation, every defensive measure, every counterattack had been interpreted by the system as confirmation of their threat level. Their very survival had created a feedback loop of escalation, with each side validating the other's aggression. The hive wasn't malevolent. It was maintaining equilibrium through destruction, a concept that transcended simple notions of good and evil. This understanding opened new possibilities for resolution, but also posed profound ethical questions. Could they truly justify their continued existence if it meant disrupting the forest's natural order? Did their right to live outweigh the ecosystem's need for balance? These questions dominated council discussions as they debated potential solutions. Some argued for total withdrawal, abandoning their ancestral home to allow the forest to heal. Others advocated for complete annihilation of the hive, viewing it as necessary self-defense. Kale found himself torn between these extremes, recognizing the validity in both perspectives while rejecting their absolutism. After days of intense deliberation, they arrived at a compromise that reflected their evolved understanding of the situation. Rather than fighting or fleeing, they would attempt to communicate with the hive mind, to demonstrate that their presence could be harmonious rather than destructive. Using their own network of sanctuaries and communication channels as a model, they began broadcasting patterns of sympathetic vibrations that mimicked natural forest rhythms. At the same time, they implemented strict protocols to minimize their ecological impact, reducing hunting to sustainable levels, restoring damaged areas, and reintroducing native species. The initial results were mixed. Some creatures responded with curiosity rather than aggression, pausing their attacks to observe human activities. Others continued their assaults unchanged, suggesting that the message hadn't penetrated deeply enough into the hive's consciousness. Yet Kale noted subtle changes, attacks becoming less frequent, creatures showing hesitation before engaging, and increased tolerance for human presence in certain areas. These small victories encouraged them to refine their approach, developing more sophisticated communication methods and demonstrating their commitment to coexistence through concrete actions. As spring deepened into summer, a fragile truce began to emerge. Not peace exactly, but a state of cautious observation on both sides. The forest remained dangerous, its guardians ever present, but the constant threat of annihilation receded. Kale understood that this balance required perpetual maintenance. Any return to their previous ways would reignite the cycle of violence. Yet for the first time he saw hope in their struggle, not as conquerors or refugees, but as participants in a larger ecological conversation that transcended individual lifetimes. The months that followed tested this newfound equilibrium in ways that pushed both species to their limits. Summer storms brought flash floods that threatened to expose hidden sanctuaries while forcing creatures from their flooded tunnels. Drought periods later in the season created tinder-dry conditions that made any campfire potentially fatal, while also driving wildlife, and therefore predators, into increasingly concentrated areas. Through it all, the delicate dance of coexistence continued, each challenge requiring innovative solutions that respected both human needs and the forest's ecological balance. Kale found himself spending more time observing than fighting, studying the subtle changes in creature behavior and how they correlated with environmental shifts. He noticed patterns that suggested the hive mind was learning to differentiate between sustainable human activities and genuinely threatening behaviors. When villagers harvested only mature plants and left seeds for regrowth, creature activity decreased in those areas. Conversely, any attempt at large-scale resource extraction immediately triggered aggressive responses. This observation led to the development of what Kale termed rituals of respect, deliberate actions designed to demonstrate their harmonious intentions. Before gathering food or medicinal plants, groups would perform ceremonies that included elements the creatures seemed to respond to positively: specific drumming rhythms, offerings of certain herbs, and careful restoration of disturbed areas. These rituals evolved from simple gestures into complex performances that incorporated both human traditions and observed creature preferences. The creatures, in turn, began exhibiting what could only be described as reciprocal behaviors. Certain individuals, recognizable by unique patterns in their fur that absorbed light differently, would appear during these rituals, watching silently before retreating. Occasionally, they would leave behind items: unusual stones, rare herbs, or pieces of shed hide that proved invaluable for weapon crafting. These exchanges, though fraught with tension, marked a significant shift in their relationship. However, not all encounters ended peacefully. Rogue creatures, perhaps disconnected from the main hive consciousness or operating on outdated information, still launched attacks without provocation. The challenge became distinguishing between these isolated incidents and genuine breaches of the fragile truce. Kale established a system of graduated responses: initial attempts at communication followed by non-lethal deterrence, with lethal force reserved only for persistent aggression that threatened multiple lives. Midsummer brought an unexpected development that tested this protocol to its limits. A massive creature, larger than any previously encountered, emerged near the old village site. Its presence caused smaller creatures to retreat and remain stationary for days, simply observing. Elders recognized it as what ancient texts called a witness, a manifestation of the hive's collective awareness rather than an individual predator. Traditional lore claimed that encountering a witness meant the forest had reached a critical decision point regarding their presence. The community gathered in unprecedented numbers, performing every known ritual of respect simultaneously while maintaining defensive positions. The witness responded by creating intricate patterns in the ground using its claws, revealing a level of fine motor control never before observed. Mara interpreted these patterns as a form of communication, suggesting the hive was attempting to establish more direct contact. This breakthrough initiated weeks of intensive study and experimentation, leading to the development of a rudimentary language based on pattern recognition and harmonic vibrations. Through this new means of communication, they learned crucial information about the hive's perspective. The initial attacks hadn't been purely defensive but also investigative, seeking to understand why this particular human settlement resisted absorption unlike others throughout history. Their constant adaptation and survival against overwhelming odds had intrigued the hive, leading to the current state of cautious observation rather than outright hostility. As autumn painted the forest in hues of amber and crimson, marking one full cycle since the first attack, Kale stood atop a rocky outcrop overlooking what remained of their original village. The transformation over the past year defied simple categorization. Victory felt too triumphant, peace too passive, coexistence too clinical. They had become something new, neither conquerors nor refugees, but participants in an ancient dialogue between species and environment. Below him, villagers moved through carefully choreographed routines that blended traditional practices with newfound understanding. Children learned both hunting skills and the complex patterns of hive communication, their laughter carrying through the crisp air as they practiced drawing symbols in the dirt. Hunters prepared for their expeditions with equal attention to weapons and ritual offerings, their movements reflecting a balance between readiness and respect. Even the elders, keepers of ancient wisdom, eagerly incorporated new knowledge into their teachings, weaving modern discoveries into timeless stories. The creatures, too, had changed. While still formidable predators, many now exhibited behaviors that suggested mutual recognition. Some would patrol the edges of human territories almost like shepherds, warning away other predators that might disrupt the delicate balance. Others participated in elaborate exchange rituals, bringing rare resources from deep within the forest in return for carefully measured offerings. Most significantly, attacks had virtually ceased, replaced by a system of warnings when humans inadvertently crossed boundaries or disrupted sensitive areas. Yet challenges remained. New generations would need to learn these lessons anew, each child finding their own path to understanding. Environmental changes continued to test their adaptability, requiring constant adjustment to maintain harmony. The threat of rogue creatures persisted, serving as a reminder that equilibrium was never guaranteed, only earned through continuous effort. But perhaps most importantly, they had learned to view their situation not as a problem to be solved, but as a relationship to be nurtured. Kale watched as sunset painted the horizon in colors that reminded him of the hive's pulsating chambers, beautiful, mysterious, and vital to the forest's health. He touched the bone knife at his side, its worn surface bearing countless marks of survival and adaptation. Somewhere in the distance, a familiar pattern of shadows moved through the trees, neither threatening nor friendly, simply present. He nodded acknowledgement, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adaptations, and new opportunities for understanding. The forest had indeed awakened, but not merely as a predator. It had revealed itself as a living entity capable of both destruction and dialogue, of testing and teaching. And they, in turn, had discovered strengths they never knew they possessed, not just in weapons or defenses, but in their ability to change, to learn, and to find common ground with even the most alien of intelligences. In the heart of an ancient forest, where shadows hold secrets older than memory, a people found strength beyond survival, understanding beyond fear. Their story reminds us that true courage isn't about conquering darkness, but learning to dance with it. If you've been moved by this epic tale of adaptation and coexistence, subscribe now to explore more stories of humanity's encounters with nature's mysteries. Your support helps us continue bringing these extraordinary narratives to life.